Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of Babergh District Council Cabinet. I'm Councillor John Ward, leader of Babergh District Council, and I'll be chairing this meeting. May I remind you of some domestic arrangements. Please ensure that microphones are turned off when not in use. Please do not interrupt other speakers or hold separate conversations whilst others are speaking. If you are attending the meeting to speak and persistently interrupt the meeting, you may be asked to leave. Please ensure your mobile phones are on silent or switched off. Finally, we'll be using e-voting for this meeting on the modern.gov app, so please can members make sure they are logged in and ready to use the app. I'd like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. The whole of the meeting will be filmed, except where there are confidential or exempt items. If you make a representation to the meeting, you'll be deemed by the Council to have consented to being filmed. By entering this meeting as a speaker, you are also consenting to being recorded by the Council and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and or training purposes. The Council, members of the public and the press may record, film, photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and the press are not lawfully excluded. I'll now move to the agenda. Item 1, apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. We have received apologies from Councillor Gould.
Thank you. Item 2, to receive declarations of pecuniary, other registrable or non-registrable interest by members. Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could I have some guidance, please, on item 13/43, sale of the land? I don't know that it's relevant, but I am a patient at Hardwick House. Do I need to declare an interest?
No.
No?
No.
Thank you.
Thanks anyway. Item 3, paper BCA 2237, to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of December 2022. You'll find those on pages 5 to 11 of your agenda pack. Just to go through, let me know if anyone has any points regarding the accuracy of the minutes on page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9, page 10, and page 11. If nobody wishes to say anything, then may I have a proposer, please? Councillor Arthey. And a seconder, Councillor Busby. Thank you. May we now have the vote?
Thank you, Chair. The vote is now in progress. Councillor Melvisi, I know you haven't set up properly yet. May I have your vote, please? That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. Item 4, to receive notification of petitions in accordance with the Council's petition scheme.
None received.
Item 5, questions by councillors.
None received.
Item 6, matters referred by the Overview and Scrutiny or Joint Audit and Standards Committees.
There are no matters referred, Chair.
Thank you. Item 7, forthcoming decisions list. Members of the Cabinet, does anyone have any comments on the list? No? Okay, thank you. Moving on then. Item 8, paper BCA 2238, the Council Tax Reduction Working Age Scheme for 2023 to 24. I'd like to invite the Cabinet Member for Finance, Assets and Investments to introduce this report. Councillor Busby.
Thank you, John. Well, I think we've been through the proposals and the recommendations and what the scheme's about and why we're doing it and the benefits. In fact, option 3 was put out for consultation and we've had the results back. And I'd just like to bring a few points. None of the comments or the votes suggested that we were going the wrong direction to option 3. It was only a fairly small survey, unfortunately, just 53 people, but they supported our views. I think there were a couple of interesting comments and interesting responses to the question. I think question 6, which was about the proposed income bands, showed that there is probably some work that we can do going forward on that. Maybe we haven't got that quite right, and I certainly would like to see something done on that. And obviously there is some confusion out there as to who pays what and why and when, so I think there is a target on our back to try and get the communication better on these particular credit items. Other than that, I think the consultation went well, and I think we can now proceed, so I'd like to recommend that we go forward with the recommendations 3 as in the paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Busby. May I have a seconder, please? Councillor Rafi. Thank you. Right. Members of the Cabinet, does anyone have any questions before we enter into debate? Councillor McLaren.
Thank you, Chair. Who would you like me to address my questions to? To the Cabinet member. So, Councillor Busby, I need a bit of help with the detail with these sort of reductions. I would like to know really about how many householders are in receipt of CTR and UC of working age but are not employed, as opposed to those who are employed and are in receipt of those benefits. Is that available, that information?
I'm sure it is. The number of people that are actually going to be affected by this, the number of people that are going to be affected by this are about 2,250, I think it is, according to the paper. Is that not the information that you want?
I just wondered if there was a split between those that are actually in work and receive benefits and those that are not.
I don't have that figure to hand.
Say I can provide that, but I don't have it to hand at the moment. Sorry.
Thank you,
We'll get that
Amy.
We'll get that information and provide it after the meeting.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Thank you. Chair, I would like to just add on to that. I think as a Cabinet member, I would welcome a member briefing on the details of these. The more detail than we've got. It's a very comprehensive report, and I'm happy to support, but I think some of us, me personally, would like a bit more detail so that we can make really accurate judgments when we're supporting such a recommendation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Osborne, do you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know that Ipswich Borough Council have approved option 3. Can I assume that Mid-Suffolk approved option 3 this morning? Because life will be a lot easier for the shared revenue partnership if that's the case.
Thank you. That was a yes. Yeah, yeah. There was a nod of a head, so I assume that was a yes. Yeah. Councillor McCraw.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, the fact is that the shared revenue partnership operates very efficiently. This will save money. In fact, it will probably save more money in administration than it might cost, well, certainly in that area. And the fact is that the shared revenues partnership, if the other two councils have agreed to it, plus the fact it's a good thing to do, means there can be no question in my mind but to support option 3.
That is straying a bit into debate, but we'll come back to that, but that's fine, no problem. Before we do any other members have any questions? Any other members present? No? Oh, Councillor Busby, do you have a question then?
I kind of do, yes. It's picking up Mary's point about knowing more about it. I think one of the questions that we asked in the consultation was, should other adults in the house contribute towards the council tax bill? Was an interesting question, and it kind of came back 2/3 yes and 1/3 no. And I don't know what kind of impact that would have and whether it's feasible to do it or not. So I think if that could be included in the further knowledge seeking for this particular issue would be useful.
Just to say that the current incumbent scheme takes non-dependent deductions into account. With this scheme, and seeing that there is continued support for household contributions, where those households have earnings, there would be an expectation that the second members contribute. Indeed, where those customers are in receipt of full universal credit and would normally passport to 100%, where they have other adults in the household who are working, they would also be expected to contribute.
Right, okay, so does anyone wish to say anything, members of the Cabinet, in debate on this? I know we've heard from Councillor McCraw, which is fine. Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, Councillor has already alluded to what I was going to say. You've stolen my thunder, but never mind. Yeah, I think I shall definitely be approving this recommendation. I'm glad we're going with this. It will certainly free up resources in an already pressed and hard-put shared revenue partnership, and it will free up resources to deal with other issues such as the cost of living crisis. So I'm really glad this has come to Cabinet, and I do hope that the Cabinet approve it today. It's got my full approval. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to say anything? Councillor Busby.
It's just really referring back to the Mid-Suffolk Cabinet meeting this morning. I know there was some question from them as to whether it was going to be more than 1 year, just whether there was any additional recommendations that they brought in that might affect us going forward.
I was going to mention that because clearly one of the drivers for this is the current cost of living crisis, and coupled with the fact that the scheme as it currently stands is difficult and costly to implement. Obviously we're only looking at this for 1 year, but that's purely I would say more of a technical matter more than anything else, because the issue of cost of implementing the scheme would still apply in subsequent years. So we might need to consider this as more of a longer term decision rather than just 1 year. But certainly, Melissa, yeah.
Yeah, so the scheme, once we make the change, will be there indefinitely. So if we want to make a change next year, we would need to undertake a consultation again, so we can keep the scheme under review during next financial year and then take the decision as to what we want to do for 24-25.
Councillor McCraw.
I would just add that the Shared Revenues Partnership would almost certainly be monitoring progress in this, as we monitor absolutely everything else. We have 2 members on the Shared Revenues Partnership, as do the other 2 councils, and it's it's pretty closely covered and followed on a quarterly basis, so it doesn't hang around.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments from anyone? In which case, we've had this paper proposed and seconded, and that the recommendation is for option 3. So I'll now ask the Governance Officer to conduct the electronic vote, please.
Thank you. That is 7 votes for, and that's unanimous, Chair.
Thanks, Henriette. Thank you. Moving on, item 9, paper BCA 2239, fees and charges for 2023 to 2024. I'll now invite the Cabinet Member for Finance, Assets and Investments to introduce the report. Councillor Busby.
Thank you. Yes, you've got a full report before you of all of the various charges and fees that we make, and the proposed changes from this year to next. We've conducted a very thorough review with each of the managers responsible, and they've come up with what they think is the right charge going forward. In some cases, this may mean that it seems as though there's a big increase, but that's usually down to the amount of work that's necessitated to deliver these particular services. All I'd ask you to look at is, in fact, despite the fact that it looks like some of the fees and charges are going up significantly, in fact, we're going to actually bring in less money overall than we will do this year. So, despite those increases, we have to look at the fact that the current economic environment is likely to impact us on some of the fees. And I think the most important page of the report is Appendix B on page 53, where you see the fees and charges by service. And in fact, there are so many of these services, these fees that we set, don't really have a material impact on the district. We don't have many zoos, etc. And if you look at Appendix B, you'll see that there are only 3 or 4 really significant areas where the increase or decrease will make a significant impact. So I'm happy with these figures, and I'd like to propose the recommendation on your paper that we accept them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Busby. May I have a seconder, please? Councillor McLaren. Right. Members of the Cabinet, does anyone have any questions? Councillor McLaren, and then Councillor Arthur.
Thank you. It's just I was interested in pavement licences.
Right.
A matter of interest, really. I was amazed how cheap it seemed for what the service they were getting. But during the pandemic, pavement licences were very prolifically required because pubs and cafes, and I was just interested if that was still the case, that we had a high application list for pavement licences.
I don't know the exact number. I think it's certainly less than it was during COVID. And I think we actually took away the licensing fee for that during that period as well. So, because we actually encouraged people to get out and about, and that's one of the reasons that the licensing fee is not that high for pavements, because we want to encourage the growth and health of town centres primarily. So it would be ridiculous to charge too much for that.
I think the pavement licence fee is £80, isn't it? That was set at the start of COVID, £80, wasn't it? Yeah. Any other
Can I
questions?
just ask a second question?
Yes, yeah, go ahead.
Councillor Busby, it's about taxi licensing. Do you want to answer that? Or?
No.
The Cabinet Member for Taxi Licensing is Councillor Malvesi, I think.
I can't hear.
Oh, sorry.
Microphone.
Yeah, it's with speaking to my colleague behind. I can't speak into the microphone, sorry. I wanted just to ask the question about, you and I have discussed this, but I wanted to do it publicly, about the taxi licensing, seeing as we're discussing licensing. You know, it was brought to my attention a few months ago about students with special needs in Sudbury not being transported to school because of various problems with the taxis. Right, but it was brought to my attention because it was under health. It was
Taxi provider and
yeah,
county.
but it was brought to my attention because it was having an impact on the health of the families.
Yeah.
Okay, and so I raised the question.
And we have addressed it, and we've the licensing team have met with the taxi providers and county, because it has to be a tripartite discussion.
No, I understand that. Thank you. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Arthur.
Just a quick one, thinking about consistency. Were these agreed by Mid-Suffolk this morning?
I guess so, but they're
Yes, they
going to be
were.
slightly different in some
But
cases, aren't
they are slightly different.
they? Yeah. Councillor McCraw, did you have a question?
Not a question, I was just sort of a bit of information. I know that in reports and our own press release it's stated that Suffolk will be raising their fees differently because they're a separate sovereign council, they can.
Yeah, exactly. Other members present, Councillor, who are we going to go to first? Because I think I'll go to the Chair of Overview and Scrutiny first, Councillor Hinton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Just a couple of quick points. Firstly, to say that the charges for pre-application advice in planning is a subject that is coming before the Overview and Scrutiny Committee for scrutiny in March. But in the meantime, I'm also looking at, on page 50 of the report, it talks about high hedges as a flat rate at the moment, and then moving on to a rate per linear metre, which obviously means that you've got no idea whatsoever how that is going to affect the charges. And how are we monitoring value for money for that? Because I do have one particular case where somebody paid in January 2022 to have a high hedge sorted out or licensed or whatever removed, and it still hasn't had any response from it, other than lots of apologies saying we're still looking at it, we're still looking at it, we're still looking at it. Well, the thing's grown another foot in that time, so are we monitoring sort of value for money on all of these things where we're charging? And how does somebody figure out what the increase per charge is when it's switched from a flat rate to a price per linear metre?
Well, that's an interesting question.
I guess they use a tape measure. I mean, to be fair, it is fairer to be charging on a linear rate because they pay for what we do. Whereas a flat charge, it could be 1 metre that they want cut back, or it could be 50 metres that they want cut back. At least this way, they'll pay for what we do.
I think we probably have to defer to get an answer to this at a later date. Unless, Melissa, do you have any background as to why the change was made and the amount that's actually been set per linear metre, whether there's any basis for that? Well, obviously there is, but...
Yeah, I can. So the call-out fee, if you like, is the £350. And then I know the team have looked at benchmarking across other councils as well to see if it's fair in terms of what we're charging as well. So it is a comparable rate that's being proposed.
Okay, thank you.
Just to clarify that, Mr. Chairman, so they pay £350, then an extra rate per linear metre.
Oh, that's interesting because that, yeah,
It doesn't make that clear.
That doesn't come over in this report here.
It's a bit like the public rights of way where they talk about a charge of per hour for sorting out a public right of way. That's presumably because it takes him a certain amount of time to walk the length of a public right of way. I don't know.
Yeah, the report does indicate that fixed charge was for the current financial year and that it's been replaced by a per linear metre charge in the next financial year. If we can make that clear, that'd be brilliant. Thank you. Thanks for that. Councillor Barrett.
Yeah, just picking up on the gambling premises and permits, which seem to be exempt from any inflationary increases. They're exactly the same. Obviously, we're obviously like gamblers. I mean, this is obviously our...
To be honest, we don't have any of these premises. But
well, we do. We have betting shops.
Betting shop.
We have betting shops. We have we have machines, family entertainment. We have these things, but none of them have got any inflationary increase. I wonder if this is an oversight, because I'd have thought you'd have put some increase on because of just standard, even if it was just across the board as a block. It seems to be a remiss that we're encouraging inflation linked. We're encouraging gambling.
Again, Melissa, do we have any background because under which category do the betting shops come? Because this is referring to casinos more than anything else.
No, it comes under gambling premises permits. So you've basically got betting shops.
Oh yeah, sorry, I was looking at the wrong page. Yeah.
So it's page 46. so little from it that it doesn't actually make any difference. Probably that's where we are.
Probably is. Councillor Manvisi, do you have any background to this?
I'm afraid I don't, Mr Chairman. If I can keep this question outside, the director is not present today on council, so I'd like to answer something.
I mean, I'm not particularly concerned about it, but I just feel that where you've got other issues there which are less sensitive, I think, and this is clearly just a blanket, it's kept the same. Why would that be when everything else has had an inflationary type increase?
The monitoring officer would like to comment on this, so Ifti.
Yeah, the way it should work is that because it's a discretionary service and because they're, the fee rates, the way they're meant to be set is in terms of how much you have to do, what it takes to actually provide the service. We're not supposed to be making money on them. So year on year, what you tend to do is one year you might make a bit of money on it, and then the following year, if you're then going to have a review of the fees, then you'd bring them down a bit. So it's all about working out what the fee. I don't think VAT, because I'm looking at some of the others, I don't think VAT is even figured into some of these figures. They're all, I can't see that many having VAT added on. They've been worked backwards, if you like. What's the cost of this, providing that service? How many of these premises do we have? How many taxi licenses do we have, etc.? And then you've worked out what the fee should be, with a view to not making a profit, but with a view to covering the cost of your service.
I'll come back to that because clearly, as one of our budgetary pressures is wage increases, which are obviously running higher than we have budgeted in the past, and we've already seen that is the one-off payment of £1,900 or £2,000 per employee, and then the cost of living allowance. So even taking that into account, there is an element of our cost just by actually administering this would go up. So in normal circumstances, we would be looking to cover those increases of inflationary pressures by doing that. I don't want to make a big thing of it. I just think clearly this is an oversight.
I mean, I think you were right in the first point when you said we don't make any money out of it. I mean, basically, as it said on Appendix B, this year we're expecting £6,000. We're budgeting for £7,000 next year. I mean, it would probably cost us more in all of the administration changes on forms and whatever to recoup any of the. It's so small. It's, it's the impact of what you do once you've put the column up.
Thank you. Okay, we're now moving into debate. So, Councillor McCrory.
Yeah, I've been.
And then Councillor Osborne, did you have your hand up?
Yes,
Yeah.
I've been looking at the Appendix B, which was recommended by Dave, and I think that does actually explain that gambling and small lotteries overall, you can see the budget is 7,000, and the increase is 15%. I mean, it's £1,000 increase, so there is an increase somewhere in there. I confess that might be due to volume, it might be due to the number of shops, but overall, I think we're trying to keep this sort of fairly straight. There's a lot of stuff in here which is completely unchanged. If you go through great lists, for example, there we go, taxi and private hire licensing. I think that right the way through the list, and I think that's quite right because we spent some time recently examining all those charges and hire structure. I don't think we want to change them again. And as I say, a lot of this is fairly common sense. And if it's not identical to Mid-Suffolk, it's certainly in line with Mid-Suffolk's charging structure. And that's probably reasonable for the point of view of consistency. I don't have a problem with these charges. They have been looked at and debated and discussed on multiple occasions by the Cabinet in briefings and pre-meetings. So, and changes have been made. Is there an oversight? It doesn't appear so on the basis of Table B, which I think is probably the best summary we're likely to get. And it does show that the grand total is a 1% reduction in these charges. Many of which, by the way, I note, I was writing about this just yesterday, the day before, are in fact statutory charges. We have obliged by government to include them. So they're not all discretionary.
Thank you. Councillor Osborne.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to say that, our officers do a great job in collecting fly tipping. They do it quickly and they do it without complaint. So I'm not complaining there. However, I have been advocating for some time now that the charge for bulky items collected is counteractive. We're all aware of the huge problems that we have in Babergh with domestic fly tipping and the impact that this has on people's quality of lives and the cost to the council as well. I will be approving this, but I will continue to advocate that we take a more creative and proactive approach when we look at this actual charge. I think it can be improved. I know it can be improved. I don't agree with it. I will be voting for it, but I will continue to try and get a solution to those issues that I've raised before. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor McGraw.
Could I come back on that?
Yeah,
because I wonder if anybody here has actually used the bulky items charge and collection charge. I have.
No, I'm about to.
No, and I have to say that it was £45 for up to 5 items, and I collected 5 items out of my garage without any difficulty at all. I could have probably found 6 or 7, and when I've been asked in my own locality what I would do, I'd say, speak to your neighbour. If you've only got 2, find a neighbour with another 1 or 2, and another neighbour, in the same street. Everybody's got something they want to get rid of. I mean, I'm just saying it's possible. You break it down to 5 items, and you're looking at a tenner an item, even with the increase to £49.50. So I'm not desperately concerned. I do see your point. The trouble, of course, is that it does cost money to send that van out. There's 2 guys have to load it up. But you leave it at the end of the drive or outside your property, and they do pick it up on the day. And the only problem, I will say, is the booking system doesn't allow for the opportunity to pick up more than 1 of a single item. So if you've got 2 bicycles to take away, there's no means of doing it. You have to find a way of telling them that. But I think it works.
Thanks, Councillor McGraw. Councillor Osborne, did you want to come back on that?
Yeah, just without risking getting into debate about collection of bulky items and domestic fly tipping, I suggest you take a look around Sudbury and see all the mattresses that have been abandoned out. It's okay for you, it's okay for me, it's okay for most people in this room. We most probably can afford £45 or the increase that it's going to go up to. But there are a lot of people out there that can't, so they just fly tip it. And it costs us a lot more money to collect that unofficial fly tipping than it does for collecting these £45. But I will have that debate at another time.
Yeah, I think in a lot of these cases, it doesn't matter what you charge, how much, how little, people will always chuck things away because that's the way they behave, unfortunately. Councillor Busby.
Well, and I hope, Jan, that we'll tackle that partly with the tidying up of the estates that we have, which we've started to do to great effect, I think. And I think they will therefore pay nothing for things like that because we'll go in there with a big lorry and give people an opportunity to tidy their own estate up.
Councillor Malvisi.
We did trial an operation in Sudbury where we sort of had an amnesty and there was a vehicle with a great big cage and people brought their large items. And that was very successful, and I think we're looking at ways of expanding that so that there's a sort of monthly clear-up.
Okay, if there are no further comments on this, obviously these notwithstanding everything that people have said about the fees and charges, whether some should not stay the same, should go up or whatever, these numbers have now been included in the budget calculations, and we are, with a fair wind, touch wood, going to be able to have a budget that Cabinet and Council will be able to approve with these numbers included. So it's not as if we're in a situation where we need to make some radical changes to this in order to balance the budget. So I'm happy that the numbers we've got here There's a lot of thoughts being put into them from the various service areas, and I'm happy that it's a set of fees and charges that will stand up to scrutiny for the next financial year. So, if there are no more comments, then I think we'll move to the vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote is now in progress. That is 7 votes for. That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. Moving on then, item 10, paper BCA 2240, tenancy policy. I'll now invite the Cabinet Member for Housing to introduce this report. Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The policy sets out how tenancies will be granted and managed in accordance with legislation and regulation in our council homes. The policy consolidates our current working practices in tenancy management and reinforces our commitment to equality and fairness. The policy is in line with government policy for social housing. Security of tenure has long been established as a fundamental aspect of council housing. However, in 2011, the Localism Act provided social landlords with the opportunity to issue a very different form of tenancy, tenancies with lesser security and for a fixed period of time. By doing so, the government intended for landlords to review tenants' needs for social housing on a routine basis and require them to move to alternative accommodation if the property no longer met their needs or if they no longer were considered to have a need for social housing. Meanwhile, following the Greenvale tragedy in 2017, government policy and the focus of the housing sector has placed greater emphasis on the importance of protecting the welfare and well-being of people in rented accommodation and in tackling policies which lead to social housing stigma. Our proposal is therefore to continue to offer lifetime secure tenancies, as we have always done, to support tenants and their families to make their rented property a home and enable them to put down roots in their local community. We want to encourage and enable our tenants to move to smaller and more suitable accommodation when their needs change on their terms, and so we'll bring forward a separate downsizing incentive policy later this year. This policy is being created with the help of Tenant Insight and will provide incentives to enable tenants to move on to suitable alternative accommodation when their needs change. We believe this tenancy policy and the forthcoming downsizing incentive policy will make better use of our limited resources. Both portfolio holders and officers have been working hard to develop this tenancy policy, and the context and principles of it were more widely through our all-member housing briefing on the 29th of November. We need to be clear that it is imperative that we have such a policy in place to ensure we are compliant with the regulatory standards, for which we know there is greater scrutiny of the management of council housing than ever before. Mr. Chairman, before I move the recommendation, I'd like to make 2 comments on the report, if I may. In 3.5, it should read "and will include," so that should be a change. And in 2.4, I need to point out that no decisions are undertaken, nor indeed a vote is taken, on recommendations going to Cabinet at a Cabinet briefing. So could this please be deleted from the report? I would now like to propose recommendation 3.1 outlined in this report. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Osborne. Yes, that will be amended in the report. It is inaccurate, unfortunately. So may I have a seconder, please? Councillor McCraw. Any questions from anyone? Councillor McLaren.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Osborne, obviously I'm supporting these recommendations, but linked to this more rigorous inspection by the housing regulator, as I was reading the report, does that have a big impact on our resources in the housing teams and the time they may have to spend sort of looking at this particular situation as well as part of the inspection? Thank you.
No, I'll ask Deborah to reinforce what I'm saying, but at the moment, no, it would be the same resources as we've got now if we stay with a secure tenancy. However, if we were to be decisive to move to a fixed term tenancy, the resources would be enormous, and that would take up a lot more time. I don't know if Deborah wants to come on that one.
Thank you. Yes, just to second what you're saying, absolutely. If we were to move over to fixed-term tenancies, it would have a significant impact on our resources, and we would have to make a business case for more resources. This way, we can use our existing resources to concentrate on some of the, the challenges we've got in building services at the moment.
Thank you, Deborah. Any other questions from Cabinet members? Other members present, do any of you have any questions? Councillor Barrett.
Should I use this one because it's not my... That's better. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Yes, I sort of learnt in the summer that Babergh hadn't adopted fixed-term tenancies following the change in 2011 that Councillor Osborne mentioned. I don't know whether there has been any light shed on that since then. I haven't heard as to why that didn't happen. But I believe that residents who are taxpayers need a bit of representation here in looking at this. I realise that there could be a financial impact and a manpower impact on adopting fixed-term tenancies. However, there is also a resource impact if you just have an ever-expanding council house base. That should be offset against one against the other. Has that also been thoroughly examined?
Councillor Osborne, can you answer that?
Yeah, on the first question, in regards to did we look back on what happened in 2011 and then 2015? Yes, we did. We spent a lot of time. I spent many hours with Robert and he and his team looking back on what had gone wrong. I think what we've got to do is, it was a decision that was made that was never implemented. That's a fact. However, I think rather than looking back, we've got to look forwards and not spend so much time on it now. We have sought legal advice on that, that we went to, and the legal advice was in our favour on the way that we've undertaken our duties. In regards to, sorry, what was the second, the taxpayer, you felt?
Well, it was, the analysis has been that there would be an impact on the resources needed to review people's future need, the current tenants. There's also a resource impact of the ever-increasing number of houses that you're anticipating you need, because people don't generally are encouraged to move out of them. They have them for a lifetime. So I wondered if that had also been considered when you're considering whether you could adopt five-year fixed-term tenancy.
In terms of the taxpayer, I think actually it would be more of a burden to the taxpayer because, as we've just alluded to, we would have to take on a lot more resources to deal with a flexible tenancy, and obviously the outcome of that would be most probably to have to increase the council tax. So in that respect, actually, that doesn't carry any weight. In regards to the fact about people moving on, you're actually going to have a situation where if they're in a tenancy with a secure tenancy, but we want them to downsize, they're not going to downsize, because why should they downsize from when they've got a secure tenancy to a fixed term tenancy? So it actually has the opposite effect. I don't know if Robert or Deborah would like to come in on that and reinforce what I've already said.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, just to add, I think from the staff resourcing perspective, that wasn't the direction of the question, but the resources required would be funded by the HRA budget, not the general fund. But I think the question you're alluding to, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, Councillor Barrett, but is more along the lines of that by not increasing turnover in our social housing tenants, you're suggesting that we are increasing our demand for, or our need for additional homes in the district? Which would, okay.
You've proved it in some way, so presumably there is a need, because that's what we were asked to approve.
Which part of it, sorry, approved?
We were asked to approve an increase in the number of council homes that we buy or acquire.
Yeah. So as you, demand outstrips. Thank you. Sorry. Demand outstrips supply, as we know. Housing will always be needed. I think the critical point with this policy, and I think what you're asking is a much bigger question about housing provision in the district. But this policy, I think the focus from our perspective is that the policy, the previous decision around fixed-term tenancies wouldn't have generated that churn that would have had an impact on the number of dwellings needed, and that position still stands now. So our proposal is that we continue to offer secure tenancies to tenants to protect their rights. I think Deb wants to come in there.
Thank you. And also the evidence from the research from organisations which did implement flexible tenancies show that it actually failed. It didn't work because people weren't moved out because they hadn't reached that limit where they could seek their own accommodation. And I think also there's the wider issue here in terms of creating place. What we want to do is we want to create place. We want to encourage our residents to be proud of where they live, be proud of their communities, pay their rent, and we've got a better chance of doing that if we give them a lifetime tenancy, because they then become, and feel part of the community, and that's been evidenced in some of the research as well.
Thank you, Deborah. Councillor McCraw.
So it's on this subject of fixed-term tenancies and looking at the report, if I may, at this point, or do I have to wait till debate? It's come up as a question. I think I've got some...
Pretty much in debate now, as it is.
Well, I think we probably are. So let's look at the matter of fixed-term tenancies, which for some peculiar reason are called flexible. I mean, that sort of always seems like an oxymoron to me, never mind. So back in 2011, the Localism Act suggested that we had a power to introduce these. But by 2014-15, according to para 4.9, only 15% of social housing tenancies were let on this basis. The government made further provision in 2016, however, announced in a new deal for social housing in 2018 it would not implement those provisions at this time. And the Social Housing White Paper further criticised the whole concept, making tenants feel like second-class citizens. Landlords across the housing sector who've implemented them are now moving back to the proposed action that we are taking. This isn't just us, this is lots of people. And finally, the government's long-awaited white paper, I was awaiting it massively, on rental reform, published in June 2022, announced the abolishment of fixed-term tenancies by 2030. So once again, we're ahead of the game here. Signalling the potential of an end to the current flexibilities provided. Now, I appreciate that was 2 Prime Ministers ago. Still, I think it probably holds effect. So there has been considerable shift. I think the officer point that it's been found that this movement to fixed-term tenancies hasn't worked has been clearly demonstrated over the course of the last 12 years by their own actions. Regardless, on a practical level, it doesn't work. So I'm happy with this.
Councillor Osborne.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just going to say prior to that it has been proven that it's just not working. It hasn't done what it was supposed to do. It worked, actually, I must agree, in theory, it works really well. In practice, it's a non-goer. It just doesn't work. And as Alistair's alluded to, the Rental Reform White Paper 2022 is going to abolish it. So we might find ourselves in a situation, if we did go, hopefully not, with fixed-term tenancies, that come a few years' time, then we're going to have to abolish them anyway. So we might as well stay with what we're doing. It works well. It's found in other authorities to work well, and we're ahead of the game. And other councils have found that it's been quite expensive to move from having fixed-term tenancies back to secure tenancies. So we're much better situated in the position that we're in.
Yeah, I would agree with all that. It's clear that the flexible tenancy option has not met with the success that it was that was originally envisaged for it 11, 12 years ago, and the government's realised that, and we're just now in the policy. We're just reaffirming that we're going to fit in with that direction of travel. I think from our point of view, I don't think we'd have been in a position that we'd have offered many flexible tenancies anyway. I'm sure most of ours would still have been, even now, the vast majority would still have been lifetime tenancies. A question I've got for members of the Cabinet. We have focused a lot on this lifetime versus fixed-term tenancy matter, but the policy itself does have a number of other aspects to it. Does anyone have any comments or anything they'd like to say on the wider policy that we've got before us today? Councillor McCraw.
I'm pleased to hear that we're going to be engaging further with tenants, but of course that's part of the tenancy engagement policy that we've previously passed. But I was interested to hear of the proposed. Could you just repeat what exactly that was, Jan, that we would be consulting tenants with at the end of the year? There was a specific matter that you referred to, that you've got an engagement upcoming in, and that struck me as
engagement will be continuous. There's a continuous
there was a specific
programme. Specifically,
item that
what
you were
we
bringing.
will be doing, we'll be talking to tenants about the proposed increase in rents. We will be talking to tenants, and in fact I think our Director of Housing has already started that process, so that when the budget comes to full council in February, we'll have some feedback. Members will have feedback on what our tenants think about the proposed increase that we're going with.
There was a specific proposal that I think you were bringing back to Cabinet later this year, or possibly the end of 2023. But anyway, the whole point is that we are engaging with tenants. We've adopted a tenants engagement policy. This just fits in with that, because that was separate from the actual policy.
It's the downsizing incentive
That was
policy.
it, and that's a crucial factor in actually making the system work. That lifetime tenancies should have a provision for downsizing so that we make the maximum use of our housing stock and we can continue to develop it in the future.
Okay, thank you for that. So, members of the Cabinet, anything else that you wish to say on any of the other aspects of the policy? Introductory tenancies, the ending of a tenancy, succession planning, that sort of thing. That's all covered in there in detail. So I think unless you've got any more comments, can I take that as your assent and approval of the policy in its entirety? In which case, we'll move to the vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. That vote's now in progress. That is 7 votes for, Chair. That's unanimous.
Thank you. Right, moving on then. The next item on the agenda is item 11, paper BCA 2241, Scrutiny Cabinet Protocol. And I'd like to ask the Corporate Manager for Governance and Civic Office to introduce this report.
Thank you,
Jan.
Chair.
Yeah.
This protocol has been formulated following recommendations from the Corporate Peer Review and is considered best practice by the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny. The protocol clearly defines the role of overview and scrutiny, Cabinet and officers, to promote a culture of accountability, openness and transparency, and recognises the key role of overview and scrutiny as a key enabler within that culture. Overview and Scrutiny Committee have already approved the protocol at their meeting in November. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Jan. Well, I would like to propose this, so may I ask for a seconder, please? Councillor McLaren. Thank you. Cabinet members, do you have any questions on the protocol? Councillor Busby.
What are we going to be doing different that we're currently not doing now? I mean, it sounds like a paper to approve what we're currently doing. But
So actually we've put into hard words what we're going to be doing. So we're holding monthly meetings with the leaders and the chairs of scrutiny, and we made that more formalised. So they're agenda-led, put into the diaries, and we discuss what's coming up on the work programme. We're also making sure that we're tracking our overview and scrutiny recommendations and evaluating their impact to see what added value that scrutiny is adding, and that's done in the form of traffic lights, and that's published now and taken to every overview and scrutiny meeting and to the chairs meeting. So in what we're doing is formalising everything and making sure that we're actually analysing what scrutiny is doing and making sure that it is adding more value to the processes.
And also ensuring that the scrutiny programme, the reviews and work carried out by scrutiny is very much aligned to the corporate plan and the outcomes that we've developed for the corporate plan.
I just think it's a bit of an overkill having monthly meetings between the leaders and the ONS chairs. I would have thought, as you say, there's a work plan and we know what we'll be looking at. I wouldn't have thought you needed to discuss that between those two bodies every month.
As to the frequency, we've started off with monthly meetings, whether we have them every month or not going forward, but the point is that we have the regular meetings to ensure that there is a good working understanding between the leaders of the two councils and the two chairs of the overview and scrutiny committees.
Okay, we've not got much else to do, have you?
Thank you, Councillor Busby. Any questions from members of the Cabinet? Councillor McLaren, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. John, I, as an ex-chair, I've got to support all of this. Babergh Overview and Scrutiny Committee over the last 2 years has suffered a lot of extreme changes in membership of the community, the committee, sorry, not the community. Is there any thing in place that will ensure that members are regularly updated? In planning, on the planning committee, we have very strict rules about what training committee members have to attend, and if they don't attend, then there's some sort of reaction to that. Is it possible for that to be considered for overview and scrutiny? Thank you.
So thank you for the question. So for our councillor induction, we're now looking at a programme which will form modules for the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Obviously, at the end of the day, it's down to the group leaders who appoint members to that committee to undertake, for those members to undertake to attend those committee meetings, and that is a group discipline. As officers, we can only encourage that, but by having this process and protocol and making sure that overview and scrutiny is focused and has outcomes and does add value, it's hoped that councillors will see the value of the process.
If there are no more questions from Cabinet members, I'll go to other members present. Firstly, Councillor Barrett, and then I'll go to the Chair of the Babergh Overview and Scrutiny Committee.
Yeah, he can wait a bit, because he wants to hear what I've got to say. Well, as the leader of the largest group, I mean, this is the graveyard committee.
Is it going to be a question rather than...
Yes, I'm getting to it.
Okay.
This is the graveyard committee, which is the least popular because of the least amount of outcomes it actually produces. So my question is, for you, how do you make it more relevant to the council? Because at the moment, it's just the support system to the Cabinet.
No, it's not the support system to the Cabinet, and that's not what it should be, it's not what it's designed to be, and that's not what it is. It's up to the Council to make sure that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee does what the Council wants it to do, because it's the Council's Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and it's for Council to ensure that it does carry out its proper role, its proper function. So I understand that there have been some.
See if they can get more excited then on the prospect of something actually happening with overview and scrutiny, shall I?
I'll ask Councillor Hinton. Do you have any question or comment on this?
Well, what I was going to say was that I'm sure that Councillor Barrett has read the coloured page 87 in the report, and if he looks under the column which is headed up Overview and Scrutiny, I think it answers most of his questions in terms of how it's going to participate in regular training to develop their scrutiny skills and provide constructive challenge as a critical friend of the Cabinet's engaging decisions and policy making. Certainly, it's up to the chairman and ultimately the members of the committee to challenge the Cabinet and to hold it to account and therefore be able to report back to full council. But it needs full participation.
The training that Councillor McLaren refers to in planning is obviously it's a sub-judiciary, so it has to be. It's a statutory body as opposed to, and you sit there as an individual as opposed to obviously this, which is not a formal type of training because it's only the council looking at itself, which it does very well. It likes looking at the fluff in its tummy. Anyway, I have a very low opinion of this committee.
That really wasn't a question, but we are aware of your opinion. But so I'm moving back to the Cabinet for Cabinet members to debate this paper. Any comments? Councillor McCraw.
No surprise there then.
Yeah.
So you have here present current Chair of Overview Scrutiny, 2 ex-chairs of Overview Scrutiny covering a period of 4 years, and the member for Great Cornard who happens to be on the record as having no time or effort for Overview and Scrutiny. He's stated it on many occasions, even as the leader of the joint largest group on the council. His thoughts might be coloured by that pre-idea he has in his head. He doesn't believe in Overview and Scrutiny. I have to say, as a former chair, I just don't believe that it works. Right. However, never mind. I'm actually almost feel a little guilty that we didn't do this before. Although we did actually cover all these principles, and I've made these points myself many times, that Overview and Scrutiny is a 3-part point between the Cabinet, the Council, and the committee itself. But obviously it's important to add the officers into that because the officers provide us with the basis of the discussions that we have to do, and they are, after all. Sorry, Councillor, I wasn't aware that we were interrupting each other. Thank you. However, I'm happy to support this, and I'm also happy with the tracking plan that John and the committee have brought in. I think it's an excellent idea. And I'm happy to see that go on. As I say, feel a little guilty that we didn't do it before, but then we did things as we did them, and I think we improved things as they were at the time, regardless of what some members might think.
Right. Thank you for that. It's important that we do have an effective Overview and Scrutiny Committee. It's important for the Council to have confidence in the administration. It's important for our residents to have confidence in the administration. And we do need to make sure that if there are any deficiencies in the way the committee operates, that we rectify those so that it is seen to be working effectively. But I do think that by and large, Overview and Scrutiny does work, but it can only work as well as the members of the committee will let it work, or in terms of the effort they put into it. But the important thing here, I think, is really, as you'll see in the things that each party will do, whether it's a committee or cabinet or officers, each one promote the role and importance of scrutiny inside and outside the council. And that is crucial. It won't work if people do not understand it, if people do not respect it. So we do need to keep that promotion going to make sure that scrutiny is the committee that it should be, and what the Constitution expects it to be. And so I think this protocol does go a long way to formalising that and reinforcing that. So I'm happy to, which is why I propose it, I'm happy to support it. So unless there are any other questions or comments, We're in Cabinet debate now. Sorry, Councillor Barrett, you've had your question. Councillor Malvisi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I'm supportive of this. I think it's very good. I think it's providing everybody inside the council and externally with a clearly defined structure of what should be happening. And sometimes, unfortunately, we live in days when now people have to have it spelt out. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any other comments from members of the Cabinet? If so, Councillor McCraw, you got any? No? Okay. Yes, we will now move to the vote then. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The vote is now in progress. That is 7 votes for. That's unanimous.
Thank you. Item 12, paper BCA 2242, risk management improvement. I'd like to invite the Cabinet Member for Customers, Digital Transformation and Improvement to introduce this report. Councillor McCraw.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm pleased to introduce this report. As background, in April 2021, our external audit partners, TIAA, undertook a review of our strategic risk management arrangements. They identified some good practice in our risk management framework and made recommendations to improve, including an updated risk management strategy. Now, this report updates members on risk management improvement since responsibility for risk was transferred to the Policy Performance Insight Risk and Improvement team in January of this year. Following this change, SLT agreed to adopt a whole systems approach to risk management, known as the Government's Orange Book. This government approach will help us to improve the culture and leadership of risk management across the councils. In March 2022, the councils also received feedback on our approach to risk management in the LGA Corporate Peer Challenge report. One of their recommendations was to revisit the risk management strategy and bring it to life, to ensure a more effective corporate approach to risk, including financial risk. Members of the Joint Audit and Standards Committee on the 28th of November were asked to consider the effectiveness of the revised risk management strategy to deliver the appropriate risk management arrangements. The new strategy includes the main recommendations made by the TIAA and the LGA and embeds the Government Orange Book risk management principles. This recommendation to embed our risk appetite will be reviewed further following the May elections and embedded when the strategy is reviewed again in November 23. The strategy is supported by an improvement programme to embed risk across the councils, establishing a positive culture of risk management and continuous improvement. Joint Audit and Standard Committee members raised that they would like to see further assurance in terms of companies' risk management. As a consequence, a change was made to the strategy at Section 5 under company level to note that the company's risk panel meets each quarter to review their risks with the council's risk management lead. Company risks are reflected on the strategic risk register where required. Going forward, the annual risk management report to JASC will provide assurance as to the company's risk management arrangements. Joint Cabinet reviewed the paper on December the 12th and was supportive of both the work to date and the proposed new strategy. Cabinet members, with their responsibility for strategic risk management and approval of the joint risk management policy and strategy, are kindly asked to note the progress so far to improve strategic risk management and agree the new draft risk management policy and strategy aligning with the Orange Book. At this point, I would hand you on to Jane and Teresa, who can provide further information should you need it.
Thank you, Councillor McCraw. May I have a seconder, please? Councillor McLaren. Thank you. Any questions from members of the Cabinet? Councillor McLaren.
Thank you, Chair. Who am I addressing these questions to Jane?
Well, to Alistair first of all.
Alistair
and then,
first, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, right. Well, I want to say to congratulate Jane and Teresa on a very comprehensive report. That was very interesting to read. But risk management is everybody's business, and you did note that in your report. That was what I was taught when I was doing risk management. So how are you going to make this meaningful to staff and ward members?
I think the first instance is that, of course, risk management is going to be embedded in the culture of all the various directorates. And that's where you'll most likely see it expressed. And the point at which members are going to see matters of risk management discussed, well, obviously, Joint Audit and Standards Committee are going to see them on a regular basis. As we've already mentioned, there's an annual report. But in all other reports where a risk assessment is made, and you know we've got the grid for the 16 possible places, all members will see, I hope, and I believe they will, a consistency in approach to risk management. And if they read the structure of it, they will be able to see how we separate different types of risk and how we arrive at what level of risk and what the impact of risk might be. Previously, this might have appeared to be somewhat subjective. Now, it's defined, for example, above a certain financial level, the financial risk is assessed at a certain point, and we can assess its value and then assign a number to it. So effectively, I'm hoping that's how members will see it. Primarily, I believe it will be a tool for officers in all the directorates. I don't know if I've got that right, Jane, Teresa?
Yeah, thank you. If I just clarify some of that. So we're working through our senior leadership team and cabinet in the first place, and Jazz will then be, we're also working, or Teresa's working, can tell you more about how we're working with corporate managers to integrate risk into all our service planning and further down in the business as well. So we've got risk management across into the programmes and projects. In addition to that, and we're working to embed risk into job descriptions and role specifications with HR currently. We'll also be putting in, through the member induction for this year and this May, specific training for cabinet members and for Jazz members, but other members will be provided with member briefings around risk management. So there will be the whole programme, a whole suite of how we're going to embed risk, because it is everybody's business, which is exactly why we've gone for the Orange Book approach, because it's about leadership and culture.
Can I have another question?
Yeah, Councillor Karen, yeah.
Thank you. One of the things that goes with risk management is the feeling that people have about what they're doing and how they're doing it. And so one of the things I wanted to know about was how acceptable and accepting is our whistleblower policy, because that matches risk management. If people are not going to identify problems and raise them in an early stage, I would like to know really about the whistleblowing, because that is important for staff to understand how they can access managers and directors if they have some concern about a risk. And often risks are not the big external dramatic ones. They are actually something that might be going on in the organisation. So I'd like to know that. Thank you.
I think on that side, it would be very best to get Jane and Teresa to discuss that, because in terms of the whistleblower activity, which of course we hope doesn't need to exist, but of course it's got to be considered. Do we do due diligence? The whole point about risk management is that we are doing due diligence in every point, every place where we can see that it's needed. So Jane, would you be able to help on this?
Yep. And to say we've got a corporate whistleblowing policy within HROD that staff can access through the Connect, the intranet, and get support from relevant people. It isn't fully integrated into risk. We can take that.
you want to add?
Kathy.
If I could just confirm. Whilst whistleblowing policies are absolutely essential to all organisations, we hope, of course, to continue to create a culture where people can come and talk to either the line manager or to a member of the senior leadership team about matters which concern them.
I think if I may finish, that where you've got embedded risk management as a part of your culture, hopefully that demonstrates the less of a need for whistleblowing to take place, because we have structures that take place of any risks that individuals may fear, and I think it's a transparent process. I think the risk management process is as transparent as is possible, as you can see if you go through the full details in the report and the papers, as we've looked at them for several months, in fact.
Thanks, Councillor McCraw. Any other questions before I move over to other members? Other members present, do you have any questions on this? Nope. Cabinet members then, back to debate then. Do any of you wish to say anything in debate? Councillor Busby.
Yeah, the 4x4 matrix, it doesn't tend to lead to much movement. Wouldn't it be better if you went for a 10x10 matrix? Then we could be reviewing the risks on a regular basis and everybody would be involved. I'm not serious.
I think I can answer that seriously, actually, because back in the day, under my predecessor as chair of Overview and Scrutiny, one of the things that my predecessor was very keen on was exactly as you're suggesting. The scheme he recommended was a 10x10 grid, as you've discussed. At the time, I felt that that was unwieldy, because it's difficult enough to arrive at some of what's the difference between a 2 and a 3, or a 3 and a 4. I did point out to him at the time that his experience of a 10x10 grid was based on Ministry of Defence procurement. Look how well that has gone in terms of risk management. I'm not aware of a single Department of Defence, Ministry of Defence project which has come in under budget or on time. So if that's how you're going to handle risk management, I must confess I have my doubts about such a scheme. I think we make the 4x4 work, because we've made it work and it's understandable. It is easily understandable, and it has also got enough flexibility to cover ranges of risk.
I would tend to agree with that, and I think it's appropriate for us, and it is. I think with this strategy we've got here, it's something that we know we've got to do. We've formulated it in a very comprehensive way, because there are things that we do now, decisions we make, projects we engage in, and other things we do where there's a lot of complexity, and there is a huge amount of risk, not just financial risk, but other aspects of the risk that are far more complex, and we do need something like this to guide us, to make sure that we do mitigate the risks that will inevitably face us as we go forward. So I'm very pleased with this. I think it's good. Any other comments from anyone? Or shall we move to the vote? We'll move to the vote then. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The vote is now in progress. That is 7 votes for, Chair. That's unanimous.
Thank you. Right, the next item. Do you want comfort break right now? Okay. We'll have a 5-minute comfort break. decide on as a confidential matter. However, the paper has been redacted, so there are some sections which remain confidential. So if we do wish to discuss those, debate those, or ask questions about those, we will have to go into closed session. But if we can avoid doing that and have a full debate without that, then that would be good. So, having said that, I'll now ask the Cabinet Member for Finance, Assets and Investments to introduce the report. Councillor Busby.
Thank you, John. This council approved the sale of the former lorry park as a site for new facilities to meet the growing health and care needs of Sudbury. It would involve the Hardwick House and Meadow Lane doctor surgeries relocating to the new centre as part of the wider vision for Sudbury. Detailed planning consent was granted last April and funding approved by Suffolk and North East Essex Integrated Care Board. Pending the final sign-off by NHS England, construction work was due to start this spring, with the new health centre becoming operational next year. However, a final condition of the sale is the practice doctors agreeing to lease the building for a period of 25 years, a commitment that the current partners feel unable to make without an additional break clause. A break clause which would be unviable for the developers Assura plc, who have already invested heavily in the plans. This report looks at our options to support the delivery of the new health centre and concludes that the only viable option is for the council to take a head lease of the premises and issue a sublease to the Hardwick House practice, with break options after the 15th year. There would be some risk for the council if this practice then operated the break clause. However, this is mitigated by the support of the Suffolk and North East Essex Integrated Care Board and our partnership approach to delivering this much-needed facility for the residents of Sudbury. We are joined today by representatives from this care board who would be happy to answer any questions, but commercially sensitive ones may need to be referred to the confidential section of this meeting if we choose to go there. And I'd like to recommend the recommendations, propose the recommendations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Busby. I will ask for a seconder. Is anyone willing to second? Councillor McCall. Okay, members of the Cabinet. Questions for... Oh, yes, as Councillor Busby said, we've got...
Sorry, Chair, do we need to make a decision now on the confidential, that remains confidential, the appendix?
Don't believe so. No, we've
we're not discussing it, so that's okay.
Yeah, not at the moment, no. Sorry, as Councillor Busby mentioned, we've got two representatives from the ICB, Daniel Turner and Peter Whiteman, here today, and thank you for joining us, gentlemen, today. So, members of the Cabinet, any questions? And I do want to keep questions and debate very much separate in this. It's a very sensitive paper that we've got to debate here today and decide upon. So, are there any particular questions that you have that haven't already been answered on this? Okay. Other members of the council present, do you have any questions? Councillor Simon Barrett and then Councillor Melanie Barrett.
The trouble is, to frame a question is quite difficult in the context of what is being required the Cabinet to offer, or to bid, not bid on, to vote on. So I would ask the Chairman if I could have a little bit of leniency on where I am on this.
I'll grant you some leniency, Councillor Barrett.
I'll try and keep it to a question, but it is a little bit difficult.
Yeah.
I will just go back. I was the original ward member for South Sudbury, or Sudbury South, and I was involved in an early stage with the practice manager for Hardwick House in bringing forward these proposals, which they identified the site, which was the site that the council has agreed to sell. And that was clearly slightly controversial because it was not in any plan, it was not any forward thinking of the council to give up car parking space in Sudbury, bearing in mind car parking is at a premium, and it's clearly a a difficult thing to give up that car parking space. But Babergh District Council, as its community responsibilities, duly went forward with this scheme and provided, I think, a very good opportunity for the doctors to expand. So that's a little bit of history. What I have a problem with, and this is the question I sort of get to, at what point does a district council's responsibility go into providing healthcare facilities? Because that is what we're being asked to do.
It is. I don't know who can answer that. Firstly, Councillor Busby, do you want to pick up on that? And maybe...
Were you referring to at any point where there's a break?
I'm referring to, I think that the Babergh District Council has done an exceptionally good job in providing and facilitating to the current position. I'm concerned that the request by the IBC, it used to be PCC, but I've probably been out of date on that, is not able to come to terms with the doctors who are a business in their own right, and that you know, if a business came to the district council and asked for this in a normal situation, the answer would be on your bike. But because of the provision of health facilities, which is important, and we recognise that as a district council, we have bent over backwards and actually provided our own asset to facilitate this. What I have a problem with, and this is where I'm asking, where is the point that we cross over from being a district council with responsibilities to our ratepayers as district councils to be then providing a health facility which is under the auspices of the National Health Service? And I think we are in danger of setting quite a precedent which I don't think is particularly healthy. Now, I totally understand why we're doing this and why this paper's here, but I just feel, are we as a council almost acting in an ultra-various way by... Arthur shakes his head, which I'm pretty certain we're not, otherwise we would have got this far. So I'm pretty confident that we can do this, but should we do this?
Well, I think in terms of, we're not accepting responsibility to deliver a healthcare. What we're doing is we're facilitating those people that do have the responsibility to deliver it, to deliver it.
But my question would be, what difference is there between a regular business, which the doctors are, they're a self-employed business, and any other business that came forward with a super request that was in this position, that provided some sort of social care, some sort of other facility? Say if Oxfam came along and wanted us to do that there. I mean, I just feel it is getting very blurred and it's dangerous territory. And I think what I feel deep down, as business owners, a standard 25-year lease is perfectly acceptable on a purpose-built brand new property, which you are getting. What part of it do they not feel comfortable with? And then asking us to take the 10-year risk.
Well, I think the trouble is, this is the complexities of the relationship that's in this situation.
Well, this is my question.
Yeah.
It's at what point do we say, no, we've provided what we've provided, we've gone over and above what we normally do. I think the business owners need to stand up and be counted.
Well, yeah, this is, I think, comparing it to any other situation that you're talking about, we would only be entering into this if we had total comfort that the situation would not arise after a break clause, that we would be left holding the lease for any durable period.
I accept that.
And it has to be part of a good working partnership with the NHS. There has to be an element of trust.
Okay, so I take your point on board totally. Why is that trust not from the people who are directly employed by that trust, by the NHS? So the doctors do not feel confident that we feel confident we could go the 10 years, but they do not.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. I think
I'll be quiet now.
No, that's great, and that will be fed into the Cabinet debate. Councillor Melanie Barrett, did you? And I'll come to you, Councillor McCraw, in a moment. We'll come back to the Cabinet, but just finish off with.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very grateful that we've been joined by representatives here from the NHS. Is that right? Because they might be able to answer this. What is the period of lease that HHGP currently have in Sudbury in the current base? I think that is relevant to understand in relation to what's proposed here.
Do we have an answer to that? They've got several premises, so presumably they have several different lease agreements depending on which surgery we're referring to.
Shall I reply? We do know, but I think we feel that's a piece of information for the practice that we would cover in the closed session, and we'd be really happy to answer that in the closed session because it's a commercial matter within the partnership. And because it's their information, I'm just nervous to introduce that to the public domain. But I'm really happy to answer it in the closed if that's.
Could we make it simpler? Could we say roughly how many under 10 years are there out of the number of arrangements that you have? We don't want to know details of which relationship, which rent you have with which particular practice and which particular location, but roughly how many of them are under 10 years and roughly by how much?
So within their existing premises, they are roughly under 10 years, their existing estate. Sorry. They're roughly under 10 years for their existing estate. They're roughly under 10 years for their existing premises.
Yes, Councillor Barrett.
Well, what I meant was, when it was originally signed, what length of period was it for? I don't know, want to know how long it's got to run for.
That's a different question. Yeah, that I don't know how long they've been there. I'm not familiar enough with the Hardwick House practice. Yes.
Perhaps can I answer a slightly different question? Is that possible? Because
yes, you can if it helps.
So I think it's a really important part of the context to understand that it was common practice for general practice surgeries sort of 10, 15, 20 years ago to enter into 25-year leases. They would be quite happy to do that because of the climate that the NHS was operating within with regards to the certainty for the future of the national general practice contracts. And it's that uncertainty that has led GP surgeries in lots of areas to be uncertain about committing their own personal liability into the future as their kind of predecessors might have done. And so it's that context that's changed, that might be part of your thinking behind would they have entered into a 25-year lease 15 years ago. That they might have done because the commissioning climate was different. And what we are doing as an integrated care board, as we've set out the papers, is to say it's our responsibility as a commissioner to pick up, should they leave those premises, we will pick up the responsibility of finding another provider to operate from those premises in future. That's our context.
Okay, thank you. Before we do move back to the Cabinet, I do actually have one question myself, which I should have asked a few minutes ago. What can you explain in detail to members present exactly why the ICB, NHS, or whichever how you want to describe it, can't take on the head lease themselves? Why it has to be another third party?
So the NHS entered into IFRS 16 last April 2022, which is an accounting standard. And the way the NHS accounting is set up, we are given organisations are given capital allowances. It's called CDEL. When you enter into a lease under IFRS 16, you have to capitalise the value of the lease over the duration of the lease, and that comes off of our capital allocation. So if you had a lease, for example, for £1 million a year for 10 years, you would have to capitalise 10 million off of your immediate CDAL limit. The way that's been brought in, we don't have the CDAL to cover that, and the national team are looking at that at the moment.
Sorry, you don't have the what to cover that?
We don't have the capital allocation to cover the changes under the IFRS 16.
So this is a relatively new restriction. Prior to that coming in, you would have been able to do this?
So prior to that, part of the NHS may have been able to, but at the time, the clinical commissioning groups, which is the predecessor to the Integrated Care Board, we weren't allowed to hold estates. So when it was a primary care trust could hold estates. They were abolished in 2012 and the clinical commissioning groups were created, but the ability to hold estate was taken away.
So are there other parts of the NHS that could do this? Not necessarily the ICB, but any other parts of the NHS that could take on the head lease?
So if IFRS 16 wasn't an issue, then yes, there would have been. So a trust could do it, but with IFRS 16, that covers the whole of the NHS.
So that covers the trust as well as the ICB?
Yes.
Which is why we have situations where agreements have been set up in the past, such as with the Constable Country Medical Practice in East Babergh, where the NHS has taken on the head lease and there's a sublease for the GP practice there. But that's no longer possible now, is what you're saying?
No, not at the current time.
Thank you. Okay, back to the Cabinet. Councillor McCraw and then Councillor Osborne.
Thanks, Chair. I'd like to ask or direct my questions to the representatives of the NHS, ICB, whatever alphabet soup you're using this week. As I understand, the leases on the former practice buildings would have been, I imagine, most practices, not always purpose-built, often private housing converted for surgery use. So I don't think they're directly comparable with a lease, for example, for a purpose-built unit, which is not designed just to be a practice, but also to be a local health centre, a centre of excellence, a centre for training, a centre with certain facilities that a normal practice would not have. All of that says to me that there is a facility that's made for a purpose that I cannot imagine in 15 years' time those practice buildings will no longer be being used. There won't be somewhere else for the NHS, whatever form it might be taking. Whoever's providing health services is going to need to be somewhere. Why would they not want to be in a purpose-built system operation for exactly that purpose? It's the blindingly obvious thing to do, and there would not be anywhere else to go at short notice. So that gives me some security. What I was hoping, though, was that you could provide us with some understanding of how the NHS is going to work in 15 years' time as your best guess. I mean, there is going to be, without doubt, requirement for health provision in Sudbury and covering Great Cornard. Have you any thoughts about where else you might go? Have you, I mean, you've got some confidence, and your letter of comfort, although not legally binding, is actually a letter of common sense to my mind, because what else can the NHS do, whatever form it might take? Could you just expand upon that and see if I'm moving this in the right direction? Because I think this is the issue. Yes, there's a risk, but how severe is that risk? And is it worth doing this because of the outstanding need for medical services in Sudbury and Great Cornard, which isn't going to go away? So could you expand on that?
Absolutely, thank you. And just before I answer, I think I just want to go on record as saying thanks to council colleagues for considering this, because I think this isn't a position we want to find ourselves in, and in other parts of the country, the easiest thing to do is to sort of walk away from the scheme. So I just want to, and I appreciate this is a challenging a question that you are considering. Something which may help. And I've been sort of working in the NHS since 1990, and when we have a number of reorganisations, which is part of what we constantly do, and I've been party to, and the statutory responsibilities that each authority has pass on to the successor body. So we as the Integrated Care Board pick up the statutory responsibilities of our predecessors, and we currently have a statutory responsibility to make sure that primary care services are made available to the people in our jurisdiction. And in this case, the Sudbury population. So we must, and we're statutorily required to make sure there is primary care services available, and therefore we need to make sure there are facilities in that community available. And as you quite rightly say, by entering into this long-term lease, the only practical option for the place for those services to be provided is from within those premises. And furthermore, should the existing doctors hand the contract back, we can make it a requirement of whoever wants to hold this, lot of money from this NHS contract. If you want to hold this contract and provide primary care in this area, you must operate from these premises. We can make that a requirement. Therefore, as close as we can get to without actually saying we definitely will, because as soon as we say we will, then all of the CDL kicks in and it becomes our asset, and it effectively stops us proceeding. Quite what form the NHS will take in 15 years, we could probably all have a good guess at that. What I think we can be as sure as we can be is that the statutory responsibilities continue. So that is the thing that is consistent through these different reorganisations that we undergo over time.
So, there's a statutory responsibility on behalf of the NHS. That doesn't seem likely to change. There'll be something, statutorily. Secondarily, the service providers of primary health care, they are financially rewarded, are they not? In fact, some people have said a variety of things about those. I'm not going to go into that, but there is a financial reward for anybody providing primary health care, and there's a perfectly purpose-built facility going to be available, and its lifetime is a great deal longer than 15 years. I think that's all that needs to be said, frankly. I think the risk is minimal and worth taking. I think it's worth it because the people of Sudbury deserve no less.
Thanks, Councillor McCraw. Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is directed to our visitors. Thank you very much for being here today with your nice smiling faces. It's nice to get that when we go in the surgery as well. It's away from the lease, you'll be pleased to know, and it's actually about creating new jobs. You say that you will be creating 20 new jobs. Now, we are all aware in this room and way beyond the issues that you've got in recruiting and retaining staff, medical staff. So what makes you so different that you feel confident that you're going to be able to get these 20 additional staff in places when you're already struggling to retain the staff that you've already got? I'd like some sort of assurance on this actual question, please. Thank you.
So I think it's a seller's market. If you're a doctor or a nurse or a paramedic, you get to choose where you want to work. And so we need to provide a great environment for staff to live and a great environment for staff to work. And what a good premises does is exactly that. So that's one of the factors. And also being part of larger health centres, so professionals can support each other. So at coffee break, they can ask each other, I've got this difficult issue, or can you support me with, or I visited this patient yesterday, or I didn't know. And so these larger health centre premises facilitate environments where health professionals want to work because they can provide good quality primary care because they can support each other. And it's something, it's not a guarantee, but it means that when Sudbury's competing with other areas with those professionals who are choosing where to settle, that it gives you an asset to attract people into the community to work and stay working there. Yeah.
So there is a slight risk there, isn't there, that you'll have this brand new, beautiful building and the benefits that it gives to people in Sudbury, but not have sufficient staff. There is another risk to that, isn't there?
I mean, I think it is a risk, but remember we have a statutory responsibility to make sure there's good quality primary care services there. So if they're struggling to recruit, then we would need to get around them, which we do from surgeries from time to time, to think about how can we resolve it. And we had a surgery in Glemsford, thank you, where they had exactly the circumstance where the local practice couldn't manage it and the hospital has taken over, and they've used their kind of buying power, if you want to use that term, to cover off the workforce. So the workforce is what is needed for this population, and I think it is a risk, but again, the contract value in terms of the council's position, I don't think it would affect the council's position. It's more us as the NHS commissioner to make sure we're getting satisfactory services. But that risk exists anyway, whichever building is built, about how we make sure that those services are provided to adequate quality when we are commissioning it and when the CQC inspect the surgeries.
Councillor McLaren and then Councillor Malvisi.
Thank you. Can you just confirm for me, West Suffolk is building a new hospital? Well, we hope they're going to build a new hospital, get the money. But modern hospital care is enlarging into satellite clinics and things like that. And this proposal is actually going to provide some of that. So in some ways, this development would be a confirmation as hospital services contract. We have to have these sort of services within our communities.
I mean, absolutely yes, I think is the answer to that. The hospital is being built on the basis that things that can be done in the community that come into the hospital now, in future won't. They'll be done in community settings, and great premises is a key part to making that happen. So this in a sense would help us solve the Sudbury question. We then have to think about how we work around the other aspects of West Suffolk to get equivalent facilities, really. But you're right, it's a key part of that strategy. Yeah.
It is in line with modern healthcare. Healthcare is going to be totally differently provided to what we've all been used to.
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm a bit confused because you kind of contradict yourself in saying that you need to have a good facility, all singing, all dancing. Yet your doctors are only willing to sign a 15-year lease. Most doctors signing into a practice are around about 40. They've done their training, they've done their practice, and they're now in a position to settle down. So they'll be looking to retire at about 50, between 50 and 55. That's the end of their lease. They've got nothing to sell. They've got nothing to sell. So I don't know how the NHS can turn around and say, well, we'll change the capitalisation on things. When did that happen? How recent was it? Because no businessman in their right mind will sign a 15-year lease and make a huge investment. So I'm confused, because the arguments you're presenting don't wash with me, I'm afraid. And I live in a village that is going through this pain threshold, trust me, and it's not pleasant, it's not nice, and it's causing a lot of very deep-rooted resentment and very deep-rooted angst as to how they're going to turn the surgery round and deliver. And I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, well, you know, the electors haven't got the benefit of sitting here with me and listening to you, but they've got an inbuilt radar of concern. So I just don't see how you can square this round pole.
Are you able to provide some clarity?
I think so. I'm trying to distill the question. I think the I mean, just to get some basic facts across. So the doctors don't put any of, you probably know, any of their own capital into this project. The capital entirely comes from Assura.
I mean, I'd love to have had a job like that.
The lease that they take on is reimbursed by the NHS. But what they have is they have a liability for the lease, and their concern is, and a lot of this relates to, and this is generically, so I'm not talking about this practice because I think that isn't appropriate in this situation, and this is a generic concern, is a lack of confidence in the NHS England and their rules they're setting for setting national contracts for general practice. That's what the root of the concern is that what will be the future term. That's where those terms are determined. What if I can't live within those terms in the future, yet I have got a 25-year personal commitment into the future. That is at the heart of this, and it's that lack of confidence, and that climate has changed, I think, in the last sort of 10 years, and both lots of different parties. Even at the weekend, we've had people saying, actually, we should do away with independent general practice. We should move to a salaried service. All of which are valid arguments. But if you're an independent contractor trying to think about taking up that personal liability, that's at the heart of where some of this concern comes from. But meanwhile, you know, what we're trying to do, we've got this great scheme on the table. It's the right modern health service solution, and it's us trying to navigate through this uncertainty. And I think it's hence we're sort of collectively sort of wrangling with this to find a way through. So, and I think the building is obviously part of what the quality practice needs to do. And I'm aware of your sort of local surgery's concerns because we've sort of spoken separately, and that's obviously another big part of our job is dealing with lots of those issues where they arise with surgeries. I'm not sure if that helps, Chair, but I'll have my best stab at it.
Yeah, right. Interesting.
Thank you. Councillor McCraw.
I just want to ask, why did NHS England decide on such a silly policy as IFRS 16? I mean, why on earth? Because without that, we wouldn't even be discussing this. And frankly, it sounds to me as though somebody up top needs their head examined. And actually, I think the council, whatever decision we make, should state that somebody upstairs in the NHS, in NHS England, should re-examine the adoption of this accounting regulation, given the size of the NHS and given the size of its capital projects across the country, to nitpick that affects an individual location so easily as this. Silly.
Yeah, I agree. It's there are clearly some failings somewhere along the organisation that really need to be sorted out, because it's does anyone else from the Cabinet want to say anything? Councillor Busby.
Yeah, I've got a couple of kind of off-the-wall questions, if you like, which I think Arthur may be able to answer. What happens if Babergh merges with Mid-Suffolk and Babergh disappears and we have Heart of Suffolk? Does our responsibility stay the same then?
So if any councils cease to exist for any reason, then their successors would inherit any contractual arrangements, so that the contract would simply transfer to the successor body.
Okay. And the same with...
Similar with if unitary structures, for example, were to happen.
Yeah, so if Sudbury were to end up in West Suffolk after a unitary, then it would still be Babergh's responsibility?
No, that potentially... At that point, it would potentially be able to split the two out on the basis that it would go with the contract would go with the place, and the place, if it were in a part of a local authority area, would then be in that area, not in the rest of the area, as it were. But essentially, the contractual requirement linked to local government stays in one way, shape, or another.
Okay, and then, okay, so let's get to a situation where we get to the 15 years and the break clause has been called in. We're still committed to the head lease, so we're still paying. The amount that we pay out is fixed with Assura. When we get, if you've called the break clause and you then bring in somebody else after the 15 years, are we at liberty to renegotiate our portion of the lease so that the sublease could actually generate a profit to Babergh?
That's probably one for Emily, isn't it? Yeah.
So if I just step in. So there would be a 25-year lease in place with the building owner, so Assura. And then there would be a sublease below that, which would be for a similar term, but with break clauses. If the break clause was implemented, then the lease that we have in place with Assura would remain the same. It wouldn't change. It would be subject to review in the normal way. And in theory, you could renegotiate and create a new lease with the new incoming tenants. However, that lease is going to be similar to the same kind of rules and regulations that the current proposed sublease is, because of the funding mechanism or reimbursement mechanism that's in place for doctors. So there is the potential for change, but it's likely to be along the same lines as the current structure, unless there are further reorganisation in how the system is managed. Within the heads of terms for the lease for the centre, there is a clause that would allow the lease to be terminated by the council should the rent no longer be reimbursable by the NHS authority as well. So if there had been such a significant restructure of the health service that GPs are no longer sort of reimbursed for their rent, then that would give the council the opportunity to terminate their lease at the same time as the sublease is terminated.
No, not under those circumstances. If we were able to turn, that's the kind of the last fallback position, is that we wouldn't end up with a building that we would have to start looking for lease. We could do.
We'd start talking presumably well before the end of the 15 years. I mean, it'd be silly not to.
So if I just answer that question, so yes, all break notices have a notice period. So that notice period would be well in advance of the lease actually terminating. The same, I would say, would be the same for the GP contracts as well, that there is a notice provision. So we would be working with partners at an advanced stage to make sure that you had continuity of service, and actually from the council's perspective, continuity of rental income, to make sure that any risks were mitigated.
Thank you, Emily. Another question from me. If the land that is being provided, was not Babergh land, if the practice had found another parcel of land owned by somebody else, maybe even the NHS's own land, which they own next to the Sion Health Centre in Sudbury, would you still be coming to us to help sort out this problem? How would you sort it out if Assura were developing on land owned either by the NHS or by another party?
I think that the true answer is, because of the current capital control rules, it's stymieing us making developments like this, of this nature. So we're struggling. If it was on NHS land, we'd need to live within the NHS capital limits, and then we get into a queue, which is a very long queue with not enough NHS capital coming down it. So if we have NHS land, we're then competing with many other asks for NHS capital, which is really restrained. Or we're going to a third party on third-party private land, and they're asking for a 25-year lease, and the doctors again to cover the bank costs, and we find ourselves in exactly the same circumstances. So those are the sort of the three.
So who would help
situations.
you out under those circumstances? Emily.
Sorry. So part of the reason we're being asked to step in is so that we can kind of underwrite the value of the investment of this property. So a third party to step in would need to be somebody who has a strong covenant strength, like the NHS or like ourselves. So if an individual owned a piece of land and that individual was asked to step in, they wouldn't be protecting the value of the building to ensure that you've got a viable development. What we need to make sure is that the investment value of the building, the finished product, exceeds by a small proportion the cost of delivering it. And that's what we're really trying to do, is create a structure that helps to make sure that the value of the building at the end exceeds the construction costs. That could only be done by somebody with a strong covenant, such as local government, NHS, other kind of government bodies. So it's unlikely that we'd have a situation where a third party was asked to act in this kind of a way. It really does need to be someone or a body with a sort of similar standing to ourselves.
So if it were land owned by somebody else, then this project wouldn't proceed.
Well, or potentially we could still be asked to do this. We don't need to be the original landowner to be the head.
So they'd come running to us under any circumstances.
There's the potential to work in a kind of partnership way in any circumstances. The fact that we own the land just means we've been involved in this project for many, many years. I don't think it's necessarily the reason why we're having these conversations today, if I'm honest.
Does anyone wish to say anything at this stage? So I've got a few things I want to say. Yeah, we are. Yes. I will allow you to say something else if you wish to, Councillor Barrett. And then Councillor Osborne.
What I'd like to do is just have a quick summary of where we are, because I think it's quite important, and I think this is where I have a problem with this project. So you've got a doctor's practice, which we have to say is a business. It is termed as a self-employed Schedule D business. Gets a brand new purpose-built property, which the rent for that property is paid by the NHS with no input. So they've got no skin in the game, which is unusual for a business. There's no capital requirement from those or liability to those self-employed practitioners. They have a period of stability of 15 years where they're there, fully paid for by the NHS, supporting the 24,000 people of Sudbury. And one thing I think hasn't come across, which I think is worth noting, Hardwick House practice is in Sudbury. Sudbury is on the border of Essex. Half of those people, I would suggest, nearly half, are from Essex that use that practice. Just a point to note. So the people that have the net benefit of this brand new facility, which is provided for by the NHS and funded by the NHS and then facilitated by ourselves, but they have no skin in it and are not prepared to go to a 25-year standard lease. I just feel the position of the doctors is poor. I think it's absolutely poor. They're there, doctors, as far as I was concerned, are there to provide for their patients. To me, at the moment, it doesn't look like they're very much in providing for their patients. I'm not going to say what I really think, but I just feel it does seem that it's getting skewed, and I'm just concerned as a district council. This is my main thing. I mean, I think, at the end of the day, I think we'll probably do it because it's the right thing to do. I think it's the right thing to do. But what worries me is what's the thinking behind why we're in this position. That, I think, is worrying.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Firstly, Councillor Osborne and then Councillor Busby.
It's just a point.
Oh, okay, go on.
Said it's just I think we are not in the South Suffolk North Essex Hospital Trust.
The integrated care system covers Suffolk
I just meant
and North East Essex, but I'm not sure necessarily whether the Essex catchment in Sudbury falls within
NHS
that.
is already operating across boundaries.
I can assure you that any number of patients are from North Essex villages.
But Councillor McCraw, they're not likely to be North East Essex, part of this integrated care system. It's a different part of Essex, just that further west. Councillor Osborne.
Right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you know, I'm really divided on this, and actually Councillor Barrett has raised a really valid concern. And I really see his point about us being a district council and not a health provider. So you've got a valid point there. I don't often agree with you, but I do on this one. I would debate that, but anyway. However, I'm also aware of the advantages that this scheme will bring to the people in Sudbury and Cornard. You mentioned that other councils have walked away from similar projects, which is also a concern. However, the risk to the council, listening to the debate today and reading the reports and all the information before us, is minimal. And although this is not an easy decision, I'm aware of the consequences. If we do not give this our approval, it will fail. And I can't have that on my conscience, where we walk away from a project that's going to fail. How can I face people when I say we didn't vote on it, so sorry, you're going to have to put up with the Hardwick house that you've currently got and the lack of services that you've got from that? I can't go with that. So, again, we make reference to it's the right decision, and I shall be voting for this. I don't know that necessarily I completely agree to what's happening, because I can see the points that other councillors have raised, and it is a concern. Why should we be taking on this responsibility when actually it's the NHS? But we've got to. We're in a position where I don't feel we could walk away, so I shall be approving this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Osborne. Councillor Busby.
Yeah, I think I'm responding to Simon's the doctors haven't got any skin in the game comment, which is, the way I look at it, it's not the doctors that have the responsibility to provide doctor services in Sudbury. It's the NHS who have the responsibility to do. So the doctors, I presume, the NHS could sack or get rid of the doctors in that surgery if they're not performing, and bring new ones in. So that's why there's no ownership of the building.
I think my point is that I think the trouble is it's very difficult, and it gets very emotive when you start talking about doctor surgeries, because everyone gets involved. But actually, if you're cold-hearted about it and you look at it as a business, which it is, then that's where it's a different model totally. But one point which I've just thought about, which is, Melissa, could you clarify? Because obviously we have got, we're talking about this liability from the NHS on their IAS, but presumably we've got a liability in taking on a lease. So it would affect our ability to borrow, possibly, although we've got plenty of headroom. But it could, if you look at it, it's a liability on our balance sheet. Is that correct?
Yes, Melissa, yeah.
At the moment, it wouldn't be, so it would be within our revenue account. So the IFRS 16 doesn't apply to us until 24, 25, so there would be a shift then when it comes onto our balance sheet, so there would be a change for us.
So we would have 12 months, but then you would have to...
Okay. Councillor McLaren.
Can I just say something? If GP contracts are changed, and probably will change, if they become salaried, let's just take note, it won't just be Hardwick House, group of practitioners, that it's going to happen all over the country, because the GP contract was very secure for GPs. It's been in place a long time. It's changed a bit over the time. But you're right, Simon, it is a business. But the threat to GPs is if they become salaried. So this won't be the first example where there'll be changes in the provision of health services wherever in the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McLaren. Councillor McCorrell.
I think it's quite possible we could be debating this in another half an hour's time, should we wish, but I would like to propose that we move to the vote immediately and ask for a second.
I will in a minute. I just want to say a few words, if that's all right. Councillor Arthey first.
Yeah, it was actually really interesting to hear Councillor Barrett talk, because I think all of us have a little bit of sympathy for some of the things that he's been saying. And it's not our responsibility, and we get to a point where we have to decide whether we want something to happen. And I think he got to that point himself, and that is, in order to support the communities that we represent, we want this to happen. And in order to make it happen, we're going to have to do something that kind of is a little bit contrary to the way that we would have wanted it to happen. Only an hour or so ago, we approved our risk policy and strategy, and this is kind of what it's about. What are the risks that are associated here? I think that with doctor surgeries, we've got more problems coming in the future with regard to cell contributions as well, because we have a similar sort of train of thought going with regard to cell contributions, where we require the applicant to have a 25-year minimum lease. So I can see that we might have issues coming there in the future as well. But I just go back to really the point, and that is we want it to happen. And if this is the only way we can make it happen, then this is the way we have to go, I think.
Yeah. Councillor McCraw.
On that point of risk management, if you look on pages 120 to 121, you can see the risk assessment as being the likelihood being unlikely and the impact being bad. But as a score of 3, I think pretty much is an accurate statement of just how, normally speaking, I start to worry when we get to 6.
Yeah. Okay. I think we all agree this is one of the most difficult decisions we've had to make. On the one hand, we do want to see a new medical centre. On the other, we are now having to shoulder some of the financial risk, albeit small, admittedly. And that's not something that was suggested at the start of this process. And Councillor Barrett has given us some background. About 5 years ago, we started to talk to the Hardwick House practice to see if we could identify land for the new medical centre. And indeed, I had a meeting with them in Sudbury in January 2018. Now, eventually, the lorry park was agreed, and everything has proceeded with all parties, including Assura, in good faith. Now, the practice seems to have rewarded our help by effectively holding a gun to our heads by deciding that they don't want anything more than the 15-year lease. If we don't assist, then there won't be a new state-of-the-art facility for Sudbury. And Assura would have wasted a lot of time and money designing the centre and obtaining planning permission. The practice must have known at the start that they would have had to commit to a 25-year lease. I really can't believe they were so naive as to think otherwise. Councillor Barrett has addressed the fact that the partners don't want this risk. Well, welcome to the commercial world. Other businesses do have to accept risk as part of development and expansion. Neither party is likely to be here in 15 years' time. The risk to us, or more likely successor council to Babergh, is still there despite the letter of comfort from the ICB. And we know that doesn't really have any legal validity. In 15 years' time, we'll undoubtedly have seen another NHS reorganisation. So would the ICB successor honour the letter, or indeed any requirement to mandate the use of the health centre? Have the other parties really explored all other options, or has it just been a matter of we'll get the council to help, there'll be a pushover? They do seem to suggest that there is no alternative, and I think we do accept that argument. So that does mean that the system is completely broken at the moment, and no new medical centres can be built until the present IFRS 16 blockage is resolved. I can't believe that we're in that situation, but it appears we are. But also I can't think other councils would be happy with us for setting a precedent. It isn't for a district council to cover for the failings of the NHS and the privately owned GP practice. The ICB does need to work out a way of supporting this sort of development in the future. But it is a practice that I believe has behaved badly and let everyone down, including its patients. But what choice do we have? We can't walk away. We'd be letting Assura down more than anyone else. And as others have said, we do want this to happen. So I think reluctantly we've got no choice. It's awful that we've been put in this position. The GPs really need to think and look to themselves as to how they've handled this situation. I'm quite appalled, to be honest, but what can we do? Unless anyone else wants to say anything, I think we move to the vote. Okay?
Thank you, Chair. The vote is now in progress. Members, I think we might have to rerun that vote. There seem to be some technical issues at the moment. I'm just going to rerun it.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I think let's just rerun the vote, please, so we have a clear vote.
We'll go for a show of hands. Go on. 4.
That's
Reluctantly 4.
That's 7 votes for. That's
Yeah.
unanimous, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Chair, can I suggest that if you look at the letter from the NHS, the Suffolk and North East Essex logo is wording is "Can Do Healthcare." Maybe you'd like to change that?
Okay. Yeah. Moving on. One more item left. Paper BCA 2237 to confirm the confidential minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of December 2022. I really don't want to go into confidential session to discuss it, so if we're happy just to propose, second and vote. May I have a proposer? Councillor McCraw. May I have a seconder? Councillor McLaren. Unless anyone really does want to go into confidential session to talk about in a minute, then we'll go straight to the vote.
Thank you, Chair. The vote is now in progress, hopefully. We're just missing Councillor Arthur's vote. Certainly, Councillor, I presume that's 4, so that's 7 votes for, that's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It's been quite a long meeting, but we've got through quite a lot of business today. The next Cabinet meeting is scheduled for Monday, 6th of February at 2 p.m. See you all then. Thank you.